pregnant wife was left in a snowstorm. Millionaire regretted it when she returned. They say love conquers all, yet for one woman, love itself became a betrayal so deep, it nearly cost her and her unborn child their lives. This is the story of Emily Carraway, a woman whose devotion to her wealthy husband, Christopher Harold, led her into the heart of a snowstorm, only to be abandoned when she needed him most. But destiny had different plans for Emily. Against all odds, she survived, emerging stronger than ever. And when she returned, the truth she carried would shake Christopher's world to its very foundation, leaving him to face a reckoning he never saw coming. Christopher Harold was a self-made millionaire, renowned for his sharp mind and relentless ambition. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood of Detroit, Christopher had clawed his way to the top of the real estate development world. For years, the mere mention of his name opened doors and caused seasoned investors to straighten their backs. He owned a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, spent weekends at a private club in the Hamptons, and counted among his trophies a vintage Ford Mustang, one he acquired during a charity auction at the Henry Ford Museum. He rarely let sentimentality cloud his vision, priding himself on making decisions with cold, hard logic. Emily Carraway met Christopher when she was just 22. She had taken a job as a junior paralegal at a mid-sized legal firm specializing in corporate deals and mergers. In walked Christopher, enthralling everyone around him with his commanding presence. He wasn't just handsome, he was breathtakingly confident, a man who exuded success. At the time, Emily was new to that corporate environment. She had her own dreams of eventually attending law school, but first, she needed financial stability to help her aging mother. Christopher noticed Emily's diligence, her unerring ability to spot overlooked details in contracts. Late-night phone calls turned into dinners to discuss business, and soon, business turned personal. Within a year, Christopher proposed at a ritzy restaurant in Manhattan, slipping a diamond ring onto Emily's finger in front of a standing ovation of curious onlookers. They married in an opulent ceremony that made headlines on the society pages, her modest upbringing overshadowed by his growing wealth. But beneath the surface of Christopher's charm and success lay a steel heart, one that always weighed the pros and cons of every interaction. Emily became something more akin to an accessory, a warm presence to accompany him at social events, a loyal caretaker at home, and someone he assumed would always bend to his will. She believed they were building a life together, yet behind her back, Christopher was making decisions that steadily chipped away at her sense of self. Emily didn't notice the subtle manipulations at first, the way he insisted on controlling their finances, the dismissive remarks about her law school dreams, and his casual disregard for her emotional needs. But as time wore on, the cracks in their marriage began to widen. Though Emily tried to carry on a normal life, volunteering at a local community center and occasionally assisting her mother, Christopher's growing empire demanded more and more of his time. Each business deal drew him further from home, and each new victory made him colder, more calculating. Meanwhile, Emily felt invisible, loved only when it was convenient, heard only when she offered praise. The pregnancy was unexpected, a flicker of hope in Emily's otherwise lonely life. She was overjoyed when she saw the positive test result, imagining that perhaps this baby would be the bridge that brought her and Christopher back together. She had no idea it would be the very thing that tore them further apart. Emily tried for days to find the right moment to tell Christopher about the pregnancy. On an icy winter evening, she finally gathered the courage. She prepared a quiet dinner in their luxurious condo, determined to share the news gently but joyfully. But Christopher strode in late, shrugging off his coat with a frown. Emily could see the tension in his brow as he stared at his phone, engrossed in texts from his business associates. "Christopher, can we talk for a moment?" she asked, forcing a smile even though fear curdled in her stomach. He barely looked up. "Whatever it is, can we do it later? I've got a contract negotiation with the Archer Group in the morning, and everything's going haywire." "It's really important," Emily insisted, trying to steady her voice. With a sigh, Christopher placed his phone on the marble countertop. "All right, what is it?" When she told him about the pregnancy, Christopher was silent for several excruciating seconds. Emily watched as his jaw tensed. She expected him to wrap his arms around her, to share in the miracle that they were bringing a new life into the world. Instead, his eyes cooled and he slowly exhaled. "You couldn't wait?" he asked flatly. A lump formed in Emily's throat. "Wait for what?" she managed. "For a better time," Christopher snapped, turning away to retrieve his phone. "We're in the middle of the biggest property acquisition our company has ever seen. Do you realize how much pressure I'm under?" Emily blinked back tears. She wanted to retort that a pregnancy was not something she could just schedule around his business deals, but a part of her still hoped he would come around once the shock wore off. Christopher gave her a once-over, his gaze pausing briefly on her stomach. "We'll figure something out," he said at last, and then retreated into his office. That night was the first time Emily slept in the guest bedroom. She told herself it was temporary, that Christopher was just stressed, but a sinking dread told her otherwise. She could no longer deny that she'd married a man who saw everything, even their child, as negotiable if it threatened his carefully curated life. Weeks passed, each day bringing more friction between Emily and Christopher. She tried to make him understand that she needed emotional support. She had morning sickness, overwhelming fatigue, and anxiety about becoming a mother. But Christopher remained distant, scolding her for complaining too much and suggesting that she focus on staying out of his way during the busiest season of his career. One cold January evening, after an especially brutal fight, Emily packed a small duffel bag and booked a room at a modest hotel near the center of Chicago. She needed space, time to think, and some semblance of peace. Yet she found herself longing for Christopher to come after her, to call her in the middle of the night, or to realize the gravity of his actions and beg her to come home. No call ever came. Still, Emily refused to give up. She reached out to a friend who worked at a local law firm, hoping to find a part-time position that could help her earn her own money. Meanwhile, she carefully visited a prenatal clinic associated with Mount Sinai Hospital for checkups, paying out of her own savings so she wouldn't alert Christopher. Perhaps, she thought, once the child arrived, Christopher would finally understand what it meant to be a father. Then, on a mid-February day, fate took a cruel turn. Emily had returned to the condo to gather some of her belongings. Despite the tension, she still lived there intermittently. As if summoned by a cosmic force, Christopher arrived, tense from a disastrous business meeting. They argued in the hallway, voices echoing in the otherwise empty space. He blamed her for distracting him from critical decisions. He claimed the pregnancy had come at the worst possible time. "Worst possible time?" Emily repeated, feeling her stomach churn. "This is your child we're talking about." Christopher let out a mirthless laugh. "Children need stable foundations. And you've been nothing but unpredictable. You ran off to a hotel. You questioned my decisions. How can I trust you with the future of this family if you can't even keep it together?" Emily's fury boiled over. "I've been trying to keep it together since the day I married you," she shouted. "You manipulate. You belittle. Where's the love, Christopher?" It was a confrontation that had been building for months. Neither was willing to back down. Then, as Emily grabbed her coat to leave, something in Christopher snapped. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he roared, slamming his hand against the wall. "You want to leave? Then leave. I don't care if you're pregnant, just do it. Don't expect me to come chasing after you." Emily, tears brimming, bit her lip. She was too upset to speak, too shattered to reason with him. She pushed open the door to the raging blizzard outside, determined not to spend another minute in a home that felt suffocating. The wind whipped across her face the moment she stepped outside. Snow fell in thick sheets, rapidly covering the sidewalks. She had nowhere else to go but her battered old car in the driveway, the same one she'd used when she was a paralegal. Christopher didn't bother offering to drive her anywhere. He simply shut the door behind her, leaving her to fend for herself in a near whiteout. Emily struggled to start the car, her hands shaking more from anger than cold at first. When the engine finally sputtered to life, she realized she was in no state to make rational decisions. But stubborn pride prevailed. She refused to go back inside and beg for Christopher's help. The streets were dangerously slick. Snowdrifts rose quickly, and visibility dwindled to almost zero. Emily gripped the wheel, squinting into the blinding white. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, likely from her friend or possibly her mother. She was too rattled to answer safely, so she let it ring. Moments later, her car lurched, wheels spinning ineffectively against the slick pavement. She tried to power through it, but the vehicle skidded, slammed into a lamppost, and stalled. Emily's heart hammered. Pain shot through her abdomen as the seatbelt dug into her pregnant belly. She breathed heavily, panic surging. She forced herself to unlock the seatbelt, wincing at the strain. She tried to restart the car. Nothing happened. The engine was dead, and the blizzard was intensifying. Her phone battery blinked ominously at 10%. The screen cracked slightly from jostling in her bag. She dialed 911, praying for a quick response, but the call dropped almost immediately due to poor reception. Again and again she tried, but the wind rattled the car, and every attempt ended in a silent line. Trapped by the mounting snow, Emily felt her temperature dropping. She rummaged for any extra clothing and found only a thin scarf. Every breath started to feel like ice shards stabbing her lungs. In desperation, she got out of the car, stepping onto the slippery ground. The cold was brutal, her gloved hands quickly numbing as she attempted to make her way back towards the condo or to some visible landmark. She trudged a few steps, only to sink into a deep drift. She tried to stand, but the wind knocked her off balance. The stark reality hit her. She was pregnant, in a blizzard, and alone. Numbness spread through her limbs, and dizziness overtook her. Before she could think of a better plan, a wave of darkness overcame her, and she collapsed face first into the snow. Emily lost track of time, drifting in and out of consciousness. At one point, she felt strong arms lifting her. A voice, weathered by age, whispered reassuring words. Next, she smelled wood smoke, felt a rush of warmth, and heard the crackle of a fire. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself wrapped in thick blankets near a fireplace in a small cabin. An older woman with silver-streaked hair, wearing a faded sweater and rugged boots, knelt beside her. She introduced herself as Doris Llewellyn, a retired nurse who had taken up residence in this remote area for solitude and to escape her painful memories of losing her own daughter. Doris spoke with a gentle authority, instructing Emily to remain still while she checked for hypothermia or frostbite. Emily's lips trembled, and tears of relief blurred her vision as she realized she was safe for now. The baby, Doris assured her, seemed fine according to her rudimentary checks, but she needed a hospital for a thorough examination. Outside, the storm raged for 2 days, cutting off the cabin's electricity and phone lines. Doris used a backup generator sparingly and rationed her limited provisions. The woman's kindness was the only balm Emily had in the darkest hours of her life. She told Doris the truth, that her husband had left her in anger, that she had nowhere to go. Doris listened, occasionally nodding or uttering empathetic murmurs. By the time the skies cleared enough for Doris to drive her battered pickup truck to the nearest town, Emily had confided more of her life story than she ever had to anyone else. Something about the older woman's calm presence encouraged complete honesty, as if unburdening her soul in that isolated cabin might lead to healing. When they finally reached the town, Emily's phone sprang to life with a flood of messages and missed calls from her mother, from her friend, from an unknown number. But there was nothing from Christopher. She felt a hollow ache in her chest. Her mother's frantic voice message begged her to call back, worried sick when the news reported a massive pileup on the very road. Emily might have been traveling. After ensuring Emily was checked out at the local clinic, Doris quietly paid the bill when she noticed Emily fumbling for her wallet. Emily protested, promising to repay her. Doris simply placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "I've lost enough in my life," she said, voice trembling slightly. "You and that baby have a future. Let's make sure you keep it." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. For the first time in months, she felt a genuine connection, a reminder that compassion still existed in the world. News of Emily's near-fatal ordeal eventually reached Christopher through an employee who had heard rumors, not because he bothered to look for her. At first, he scoffed at the idea that she had nearly died, insisting it was a drama she staged to gain his sympathy. But when no sign of Emily returned home for weeks, a prickling of guilt invaded his conscience. He tried calling her phone a few times, each attempt answered by an automated message that the number was out of service. Unknown to him, Emily had switched numbers, desperate to avoid his reach. She had found temporary lodging in Doris's home until she could get back on her feet. The older woman lived a simple life, but she had enough room to accommodate Emily for as long as necessary. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's heart softened a bit with every small gesture of kindness. Doris showed her. The older woman took her to the local community center, introduced her to neighbors, and kept her busy helping in her small vegetable garden. Slowly, Emily began to heal from the emotional wounds as well as the physical ones. She wrote in a journal, chronicling her ordeal, and found therapy in the simple tasks of daily life. For the first time in a long while, she was in control of her destiny. Meanwhile, Christopher's business faced a looming crisis. The much-hyped Archer Group deal was on the brink of collapse, thanks to a scandal involving one of Christopher's senior executives. A series of poorly managed investments threatened the entire real estate empire, and Christopher was forced to allocate much of his time putting out fires and meeting with lawyers to salvage the deal. When faced with public questioning about his wife's disappearance, he brushed it off, attributing Emily's absence to family matters and never offering detail. But behind closed doors, rumors circulated that she had left him. Investors fretted an unsettled personal life, they said, indicated an unstable mind in business. Christopher was furious at the insinuation, but the murmurs refused to die down. In his quiet moments, if he ever allowed himself such vulnerability, Christopher recalled Emily's gentle smile, the promise of a child. He told himself he'd done nothing wrong, that Emily had been too fragile to handle the pressures of his world. Nonetheless, the sense of her absence grew, particularly late at night when he roamed the empty penthouse. Though he never admitted it, he missed her presence, the soft footsteps, the occasional laughter. But pride kept him from reaching out properly. If she wanted to return, she'd come crawling back on her own. That, at least, was what he told himself. Emily's belly swelled with each passing month, a tangible reminder of the life she was protecting. Thanks to Doris's connections, Emily managed to find a modest but steady job, helping a local attorney who specialized in family law. She assisted with paperwork and filings, her paralegal background finally put to use. Her new boss, Patricia Olson, was an empathetic soul who sensed Emily's caution around discussing her personal history. Patricia never pried, but offered gentle words of support. Every paycheck Emily earned, she tucked away, planning for the future. Slowly, she built a sense of independence she had never known during her marriage. Gone were the days of expensive clothes and lavish parties. In their place was a simpler life, one that brought real satisfaction. Emily found solace in the quiet moments she spent alone, hand resting on her growing stomach. She thought of baby names, read articles on prenatal care, and vowed that her child would never feel unloved or neglected. Despite the steady routine, Emily couldn't escape the lingering threads of her old life. She feared that Christopher would track her down. Their marriage was still legal, and she worried about custody battles once the baby arrived. The mere thought of Christopher's callous hands on her child made her stomach turn. One late afternoon, after finishing some errands in town, Emily returned to Doris's house to find an envelope waiting on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter from a Chicago-based private investigator who had apparently visited while she was out. The note read, "Miss S. Emily Harold, your husband has requested information regarding your whereabouts. This letter serves as official notice that an investigation has been initiated. If you wish to address this matter or make any statement, please contact our office." Emily's blood ran cold. She felt torn between her growing sense of empowerment and the terror that Christopher would swoop in to claim her, or worse, the baby. Doris, upon hearing the news, reassured her they'd fight this together. The older woman's unwavering support gave Emily the courage to formulate a plan. She would file for separation on grounds of abandonment, and if necessary, she'd fight for full custody in court. Patricia, her new boss, was willing to represent her pro bono if the case escalated. The days that followed were fraught with anxiety. Emily constantly looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see Christopher lurking. But the months continued to pass with no direct confrontation, only the occasional letter from the investigator. Emily steadfastly refused to respond. She wanted to protect herself and her unborn child, believing that Christopher was unfit to be a father. Little did she know that her absence was about to trigger a chain of events that would lead to a dramatic and unforeseen showdown. Back in Chicago, Christopher Harold fought to maintain his empire as scandal threatened to engulf him. A major investor accused Christopher's firm of concealing material information about environmental hazards on a development site. Legal battles were piling up, and Christopher's once limitless confidence took a hit. To his dismay, the media began focusing on not just his professional dealings, but also his personal life. Speculative headlines asked, "Where is the missing Miss S. Harold?" At first, Christopher tried to control the narrative by painting Emily as a troubled spouse who needed time away. But the tabloids weren't satisfied with vague statements. Rumors churned about a possible affair, about financial misdeeds, or even foul play. The more Christopher tried to hush it up, the more the story grew. Shareholders asked questions. Business partners expressed worry about his capacity to steer the ship through the crisis. Late one night, Christopher found himself alone in his penthouse office. The city lights twinkled below, mocking him. He'd always believed his success stemmed from his iron will, from never folding under pressure. But now, everything felt tenuous. A memory flashed, Emily's tear-streaked face when she told him she was pregnant, the hope she'd held that he would embrace fatherhood. A pang of regret twisted in his stomach, but he shoved it aside. Showing weakness was not an option. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Business associates started pulling out of deals, murmuring that Christopher's life was too messy. It dawned on him that reuniting with his wife, at least publicly, might quell the gossip. He reasoned that if Emily returned, or if he could stage some kind of reconciliation, the media would shift focus away from his faltering empire. That was when he hired the private investigator to track her down, but weeks passed with minimal leads. The investigator found only fleeting traces. A motel she'd once stayed at, a cancelled phone contract, sightings in small towns near the state line. Christopher's frustration mounted. How could Emily, someone who'd never lived outside his shadow so effectively evade him. Anger festered into something more toxic, and Christopher became determined to reclaim control at any cost. Months later, on a chilly early morning, Emily woke to sharp pains. Her contractions had begun. Doris rushed her to the local hospital, a small but well-equipped facility that had recently expanded thanks to charitable donations from the Mayo Clinic's philanthropic program. In the delivery room, Emily gripped Doris's hand with white-knuckled intensity, tears streaming down her face as her body convulsed in agony and anticipation. Hours later, Emily gave birth to a baby girl. The newborn's first cry sliced through Emily's exhaustion, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. Doris, her eyes brimming with tears, whispered, "She's beautiful, dear." Emily named the baby Amelia, a name that evoked both Emily's own name and a sense of courage. When the nurse brought Amelia to her, Emily gently touched the infant's tiny fingers. In that instant, she felt a wave of protective love, raw and overpowering. No matter what happened next, Emily vowed that her daughter would grow up in an environment of love and safety, far from the manipulations and coldness she had escaped. News of the birth came to Christopher through the same private investigator who had finally tracked Emily to the county records. Emily had refused to list Christopher as the father on the birth certificate, writing father unknown. She wanted no legal ties to him, no chance for Christopher to upend her child's future. When Christopher read the official notice about baby girl Caraway, he felt an unfamiliar clench in his chest. His child had been born without him even knowing, and Emily had rejected his paternity. This time, the regret gnawed deeper, joined by anger and a bruised pride. He ordered his legal team to prepare a paternity suit, intending to force recognition of his rights. It was more than just fatherhood. He saw it as a strategic move to restore his image. To everyone else, though, it looked suspiciously like a power play. Emily received a summons less than 2 weeks after she returned from the hospital. Her body still sore, her baby still learning to nurse. The summons demanded that Emily submit Amelia to a DNA test, or else risk legal consequences. Emily felt a jolt of fear, but also a surge of defiance. She'd come too far to let Christopher's arrogance destroy the fragile life she was building. With Doris's help and the support of Patricia's legal expertise, Emily resolved to fight back. The day arrived for a hearing in a small-town courthouse. Emily stood in front of the judge, feeling a surge of emotions, nervousness, indignation, a fierce protectiveness for Amelia. Christopher sat across the aisle, flanked by his team of high-powered attorneys. His cold gaze flicked toward Emily briefly before settling on the judge. Christopher's lawyers argued that he had every right to claim paternity and involvement in the child's life. They painted Emily as a runaway wife who'd refused to communicate and had unlawfully kept him in the dark about his own child. Emily's attorney, Patricia, countered with evidence of Christopher's abandonment, his refusal to even help her during the pregnancy, his neglect in the face of a life-threatening situation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge listened carefully, occasionally tapping her pen against the desk. When the time came for testimonies, Emily described in vivid detail how Christopher had pushed her away, how he'd left her to fend for herself in a raging blizzard. She recounted her fear, her desperation, and the near-fatal rescue by Doris. The older woman also testified, her voice breaking at times as she recalled finding Emily half-frozen in the snow. Christopher, for his part, gave a stiff denial, claiming he never expected the storm to be so severe. He alleged Emily had overreacted, that she chose to walk out. But his defense fell flat when cross-examination revealed his callous remarks and months-long disinterest. He visibly squirmed as Patricia read aloud text messages and emails that exposed his disregard for Emily's well-being. In the end, The judge declared that a DNA test would be conducted to establish paternity, but also admonished Christopher for his negligence. The judge made it clear that if the test confirmed he was the father, he'd be subject to whatever custody or support arrangements the court deemed fit. The custody hearing would be scheduled once the DNA results were confirmed. Emily left the courtroom, her head held high. Christopher, cornered by reporters outside, offered a forced smile, stating he was looking forward to being a responsible father. But Emily saw the rage simmering in his eyes, a promise that this battle was far from over. Back in Chicago, Christopher faced a cascade of ruin in his business. The Archer Group had finally withdrawn from their deal, causing other investors to lose confidence. Stock prices of his publicly listed ventures plummeted, and creditors started calling in loans. Rumors swirled that Christopher's real estate empire was nearing bankruptcy. He spent long hours meeting with financial advisors, trying to restructure debts and salvage what he could. Simultaneously, he had to endure the humiliation of being labeled a heartless husband and father in the media. Every step out of his penthouse was greeted by cameras flashing, journalists hurling questions about Emily and baby Amelia. Under normal circumstances, Christopher might have persevered. But this time, the personal and professional collapse converged in a perfect storm, leaving him feeling trapped and desperate. He fired several of his most trusted staff, suspecting them of disloyalty. Some of his top executives defected to rival firms. His lawyers advised him to settle the paternity case swiftly, as fighting it would only fuel negative publicity. As the walls closed in, Christopher began to reconsider the decisions that led him here. Late at night, alone in the penthouse that felt emptier than ever, he gazed out at the city lights, haunted by regrets. He recalled how Emily once looked at him with adoration, how her laughter filled the hollow spaces in his life. He remembered how she softly told him she was pregnant, eyes brimming with hope. Could there have been a moment when he could have chosen differently, when he could have shown her the love and respect she deserved? Yes, there had been many such moments. Christopher had squandered each one. Back in the small town, Emily cradled Amelia, feeling the warmth of her baby's tiny body against her chest. Nights were long, and sleep came in short bursts, but every time Amelia opened her curious eyes or smiled in her sleep, Emily felt a surge of joy. She worked part-time for Patricia, mostly from home, so she could care for Amelia. Doris remained her steadfast confidant, offering advice drawn from a well of life experience. But the summons for the final custody hearing arrived with a heavy thud. The DNA test had confirmed Christopher as Amelia's father, as expected. Now the court would determine parental rights. Emily was terrified that Christopher's wealth and power would overshadow her claim to full custody. She'd heard enough horror stories of manipulative fathers using legal systems to their advantage. Still, Emily refused to be cowed. She and Patricia gathered medical records, testimonies from counselors who spoke of Christopher's emotional neglect, and statements from neighbors who attested to Emily's capability as a nurturing mother. Each night, after putting Amelia to sleep, Emily pored over legal documents, steeling herself for the biggest battle of her life. Doris, in a moment of wisdom, gently reminded Emily to take care of her own well-being. "You're fighting not just for yourself now, but for Amelia," Doris said, pressing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Remember, you don't have to do it alone." Those words revived Emily's determination. She was no longer the timid wife who silently endured emotional abuse. She had discovered her inner strength, a fierce love that outshone any fear. The day of the custody hearing dawned cold and grey, as if nature itself mirrored Emily's internal dread. She dressed in a modest suit, her hair neatly pulled back, Doris held Amelia in the hallway outside the courtroom, ready to take care of the baby during the proceedings. Christopher arrived in a tailored suit, looking as confident as ever, though beneath his polished exterior lay unmistakable tension. His legal team was smaller this time, presumably due to the financial strains on his empire. Emily and Christopher exchanged curt nods, an unspoken acknowledgement that their lives were about to change irreversibly. Over the course of several hours, witnesses testified. Medical professionals confirmed that Emily had nearly died in a snowstorm during her pregnancy. Doris gave a poignant account of finding Emily half-frozen, emphasizing Christopher's total absence of concern. Patricia presented meticulously gathered evidence that Christopher had known about Emily's fragile condition, yet made no attempt to help or even contact her for months. Christopher's attorney tried to pivot, claiming Christopher had believed Emily had left for personal reasons and that he was heartbroken at her refusal to communicate. But under Patricia's relentless cross-examination, Christopher stumbled. He couldn't convincingly explain why he never tried to reconcile after learning of Emily's near-death experience. His arguments about wanting to be a father sounded hollow, overshadowed by the harsh facts of his neglect and the timing that aligned more with his business collapse than paternal longing. The judge listened attentively, occasionally looking at Christopher with a raised eyebrow. It was clear she found much of his testimony lacking in genuine remorse. After a final recess, the judge delivered her verdict. Emily would have sole legal custody of Amelia. Christopher could petition for supervised visitation after completing a parenting course and demonstrating consistent effort in being part of Amelia's life. Furthermore, Christopher was ordered to pay child support, the amount to be determined by a financial review, though given his business's precarious state, that figure might be negligible. In a single moment, Emily felt both an overwhelming sense of relief and a pang of sorrow. She had loved Christopher once, and it was tragic how far they had fallen, but her priority now was Amelia, and she stood tall as the judge finalized the ruling. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, hoping for a sensational quote. Emily clutched Amelia protectively, ignoring their shouts, while Patricia shielded her from the barrage of cameras. Christopher, caught in the throng, forced a tight-lipped smile for the cameras. "I love my daughter," he muttered to a microphone pushed into his face. But his eyes told a different story, one filled with bitterness, defeat, and perhaps an inkling of regret that could never be undone. As the months rolled on, Christopher's business continued to unravel. Several more lawsuits were filed against his firm by disgruntled investors, culminating in a forced sale of the company's assets. While Christopher still had some personal wealth, the days of opulent penthouse living and extravagant parties were over. His name, once synonymous with success, had become a cautionary tale in business circles. He attempted to see Amelia under the court's supervised visitation order. The sessions took place at a local center equipped for monitored visits, with social workers present. Emily, through her attorney, had arranged for limited contact. The first time Christopher held Amelia, he felt a flicker of something real in his heart. She was tiny, with Emily's eyes gazing curiously at this stranger who claimed to be her father. Christopher managed a small smile, but the child began to fuss, unfamiliar with the man who only now decided to appear in her life. The social worker noted Christopher's awkwardness, the faint tremor in his hands as he tried to calm Amelia. Perhaps he felt guilty for what he'd done, or maybe he was overwhelmed by the realization that fatherhood was far more than a public image or a legal claim. Whatever it was, Christopher left the session visibly shaken. Emily noticed. She saw the man who had once towered over her with arrogance, now reduced to a husk of uncertainty. Part of her felt vindicated. This was his karma for the cruelty he had inflicted upon her. Yet another part of her remembered the early days, when Christopher had shown glimpses of affection. She wondered if that version of him was gone for good, swallowed by greed and ambition. In the following weeks, Christopher missed 2 scheduled visits, each time offering feeble excuses, an emergency meeting, a financial crisis. The social worker warned him that continued absences would endanger his visitation rights altogether. Emily remained resolute. She did not encourage or discourage Christopher's visits. She allowed him the chance to do the right thing, but refused to bend over backwards for a man who had nearly cost her and her daughter their lives. Then, on a brisk autumn evening, Christopher turned up unexpectedly at Doris's front door, a battered suitcase in hand. Emily, startled by the sight of him in her safe haven, immediately stiffened. "How did you find this address?" she asked, voice trembling. Christopher looked like he had aged a decade. His shoulders sagged and dark circles rimmed his eyes. "The private investigator," he admitted. "I paid him one last time, told him I needed to apologize." Emily took a protective step backward, her heart hammering. Doris, sensing the tension, hovered nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. I lost nearly everything," Christopher said, voice cracking. "The business is gone. I'm losing the penthouse. I don't have anywhere else to go." Emily's anger flared. "And you think coming here is going to fix that? We're not your safety net." Christopher shook his head, tears brimming. "I know. I'm not asking for money or a place to stay. I just wanted to see Amelia and to tell you that I'm sorry." The air felt thick with unspoken memories. Emily searched his face, trying to discern if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. Christopher's eyes welled up, and his voice quivered. "I was a fool. I let everything slip through my fingers, my family, my integrity. I can't blame you if you never forgive me, but I just needed to say it." Doris gently placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Emily felt a swirl of emotions. Fury, sorrow, pity, and a small flicker of compassion. Slowly, she stepped aside, letting Christopher enter the foyer. "I'll give you 5 minutes," she said stiffly. "But this doesn't change anything about custody or visitation. You have to earn the right to be in Amelia's life." Christopher swallowed hard, nodding. He followed Emily to the living room, where Amelia was napping in a bassinet. Quietly, he knelt beside the baby, tears slipping down his cheeks. The sight of him so vulnerable, so genuinely broken, stirred conflicted feelings within Emily. She remembered the nights she cried alone, the day she nearly died, and the emptiness she felt in their marriage. But she also felt a tentative hope perhaps Christopher could change, even if he'd left a trail of destruction in his wake. In a shaky whisper, Christopher asked if he could hold Amelia. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then gently lifted her daughter and placed her in his arms. For a few minutes, he held the sleeping infant, tears falling silently onto her tiny blanket. Whatever happened next, Emily knew she would never allow Christopher to hurt her again. She had the power now, the power to protect her child and dictate the terms of any relationship. And as she watched him cradle Amelia, she understood that Christopher was paying the price for his cruelty and neglect. He had lost almost everything, and the last thread of redemption hung on his ability to become a better man. Over the following months, Christopher made efforts to attend his supervised visitations consistently. Under the watchful eyes of social workers, he learned basic childcare skills, how to change diapers, how to feed Amelia, how to soothe her crying. He stumbled often, and Amelia remained wary of him, but each small victory, like getting her to giggle, once seemed to fill him with quiet amazement. Emily continued to live in Doris's home, saving enough money to eventually rent her own apartment. She thrived in her job, receiving praise and even a small promotion for her diligent work. Patricia commended Emily on her resilience, hinting that she might someday become a full-fledged paralegal again, or even pursue her dream of law school. Life was far from perfect, but it was stable. And that was more than Emily had ever hoped for in those harrowing days when she was left to freeze in the snow. She found fulfillment in motherhood, forging a bond with Amelia that no storm or man could break. Christopher, in the meantime, took on a modest job consulting for a smaller firm, gone were the designer suits and private jets, replaced by public transportation and an economy apartment. His fall from grace was widely discussed in the media, but eventually the gossip moved on to newer scandals. Through therapy sessions, mandated by the court and his own introspection, Christopher began to see the man he had become and the boy inside him who once yearned for success to prove his worth. He told his therapist he regretted not cherishing Emily when they were together, acknowledging that money and ambition had blinded him to the blessings he already had. One frigid December evening, nearly a year after Amelia's birth, Emily was tidying up the kitchen while Amelia slept in the nursery. Doris had gone to visit relatives. A knock at the door startled Emily. She opened it to find Christopher standing on the stoop, snow clinging to his coat. Concern flashed across her face, given the lateness of the hour. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the baby. Christopher averted his eyes. He seemed nervous. I wanted to give you something. A letter." She crossed her arms, recalling the many letters she'd received from him, some filled with legal demands, others with hollow apologies. "Another letter?" He nodded, passing her a plain, white envelope. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the handwritten lines. The letter was an admission of guilt, a heartfelt apology detailing every regret he carried, from dismissing her pregnancy to abandoning her in the storm. It was a promise that he would respect her decisions and do whatever it took to support Amelia's future, whether that meant stepping aside or being involved only under her terms. He wrote that he understood he might never be forgiven, but he hoped to someday be someone Amelia could be proud to call her father. Emily's throat tightened. She had dreamed of hearing these words when she was pregnant, desperate for a sliver of his compassion. The letter ended with a simple statement: "I know that my karma has come full circle. I have lost what matters most, and I can't blame anyone but myself." She folded the letter, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Christopher exhaled a breath he'd been holding. He looked like a man ready to face the rest of his life, no matter how hard. "I'll leave you to it," he said quietly, turning to go. Impulsively, Emily reached out. "Wait, do you want to come inside for a minute?" Surprise flickered across his face. He nodded timidly, stepping over the threshold. They sat in the living room, an echo of the time he had appeared with a suitcase in hand. This time, there was no anger or desperation in the air, only a cautious acceptance that life had changed them both. Emily offered him tea, which he held but did not drink. He gazed around the cozy home, noting the small touches that made it feel welcoming, the framed pictures of Amelia, the handmade quilts Doris had sewn. His gaze lingered on Emily, who looked more at peace than he'd ever seen her. After a few moments of silence, Emily spoke. "I don't hate you. I did for a while, but hate is heavy. I have Amelia to think of now, and I refuse to poison her life with bitterness." Christopher swallowed, emotions warring on his face. "I never deserved you," he said simply. She shook her head. "It's not about deserving, it's about learning. We can't erase what happened, but maybe, for Amelia's sake, we can find a way to move forward." That night, they talked about practicalities, visitation schedules, financial responsibilities, the possibility of co-parenting classes. For the first time, Christopher listened earnestly. The conversation didn't heal every wound or eliminate every trace of resentment, but it laid a fragile foundation for a future in which Amelia's well-being took precedence. In the quiet hours before dawn, Christopher left, carefully closing the door behind him. Emily stood there for a long moment, absorbing the enormity of what had just transpired. She glanced at the letter again, reading those words of contrition. Hard karma had indeed hit Christopher, his empire in ruins, his reputation tarnished. Yet, perhaps this moment signaled that something better could emerge from the wreckage if he truly sought redemption. Outside, the snow glistened under the moonlight, a reminder of how far she had come since that storm nearly claimed her life. Emily breathed deeply, a sense of closure settling in her chest. Life would never be the same, but it was her life now, one she had fought for, survived for, and built anew with love at its center. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, hope. Emily's story reminds us that even in the darkest hour, when all seems lost and the snow threatens to bury us, there can be a path forward built on resilience, honesty, and love. Christopher learned the painful lesson that material success cannot replace genuine compassion and responsibility. In the end, it was Emily's unwavering strength and a simple act of human kindness that illuminated a new path for them both. If you found value or inspiration in this story, please give this video a like, share it with others who might need to hear its message, and consider subscribing to this channel for more tales that explore the power of redemption and the resilience of the human spirit. Your support means so much, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.